The Finance Minister calls it an area worthy of further investigation. In other words, he likes it, but he's not sure how well it will go down with the voters. What we're talking about is a Reserve Bank proposal to add 1 or 2% tax. They call it a levy, but let's get real, it's a tax on your mortgage. Now, we all know how hard it is to buy a house as it is. Why on earth would the government even consider making it more expensive? Well, we keep getting told we borrow too much and there's too much investment in property. This idea would simply make property investment harder. If fewer people take out mortgages because the tax makes them more expensive, it means that money can be invested elsewhere in the economy, particularly in the export sector. Demand for houses would fall, as would prices, and that could help keep inflation down. There's the theory. What it's all about is influencing our behaviour. Will it work? BNZ Chief Economist Tony Alexander is in our Wellington studio, and here in Auckland we have exporter Dave Anderson and Lawrence Diak, a mortgage broker. Welcome everyone.
Evening.
Lawrence, what would this do to the property market?
I think it definitely would have an impact, Mark, on people, but I think it would impact more on the people that they're trying not to influence, which is the first home buyers and the low to middle income earners, rather than the property investors, property traders and that sort of thing, which is where the house prices are being driven up.
You think it would put off a lot of those new home buyers?
I think it would. House prices are unaffordable for people buying their first home, and that's this will actually discourage them because it makes it less affordable.
Would it bring house prices down?
Potentially, although there is a lot of confidence in the housing market. There has been, surprisingly, last year, and I think it will continue. So possibly could, but in my opinion, I think any sort of increase like that would inevitably be passed on to anyone who was renting a home from a property investment.
Dave Anderson, you're an exporter. You think this is a good idea?
Well, we think it's good that we're having this debate. I mean, it's a little overdue. We'd like to have had the debate far earlier. The Reserve Bank needs more tools, and if this is a tool that's going to help them control the exchange rate, then we welcome it, and we want it to be looked at fast, and not to be just sort of idled away.
But you know, people are sort of home and think, oh, I've got a mortgage. Why should I have to pay more to help out you guys? What's in it for us?
Well, in the end of the day, the piper has to be paid everywhere. The economy has to be strong for people to have jobs. And people stop thinking about what their interest on their mortgages if they don't have a job. And jobs come out of creating and doing, and that's what the export sector is all about. It's a key part. And we've been worse than suffering over the last few years with this very, very high dollar that's been driven up by the fantastic interest rates overseas investors can get in New Zealand.
Tony Alexander, tell me, why is it that that exports, in terms of the dollar, just explain to us, is linked between the dollar and interest rates and mortgages? What is this connection?
Okay, the Reserve Bank wants to keep inflation down, so in order to do that, increases its official cash rate, which leads to floating mortgage rates going up, but it doesn't really affect the fixed interest rates to the same degree. And us Kiwis, we've been taking advantage of some fairly low fixed rates the past few years, so now about 85% of us are sitting at a fixed rate. And so then when the Reserve Bank moves its cash rate, most of us really don't care. We're safely locked in for 5 years or something like that.
But we've got pretty high rates here in any case, don't we?
Yeah, well, the interest rates are high, but we're determined to keep on borrowing, but the fixed interest rates are much lower than the floating interest rates. And it's really only the floating rates the Reserve Bank can strongly influence, and the tool that they use, it makes investing here very attractive for the overseas investors. And nowadays, when the Reserve Bank's slowing down the economy, it's mainly creating a high currency to get the slowdown, rather than having much impact in the housing market.
I mean, how important is it, in terms of the overall economy, how important is it that the exchange rate comes down?
I think it's very important. Basically, I think it's quite vital, because the research from the New Zealand Institute, from Treasury, is showing that our underperformance in the past 2 decades has been on the export side. We're simply not growing our exports as a proportion of the economy. And Michael Cullen mentioned that in a speech today, for instance. And maybe one reason, just one reason, is because the Kiwi dollar is very volatile over the economic cycle as the cash rates moved around, and because it tends to average at a high level these days. So there is a problem.
We're always being told we have to save more. As a country, we're not saving. I mean, for most of us, our retirement plan is our home. For a lot of people, that is it. You build up your home, you sell it, and that'll take care of your old age.
And that's a pretty logical thing to do, especially with the availability of credit these days, the availability of the low fixed interest rates. So anybody who's basically got themselves into property and not too horribly geared in the past few years is pretty much onto a winner. But this is where, you know, a lot of the diversion of money is going into property rather than into productive and especially exporting assets there. So it's partly an issue of boosting savings, diversion of money towards the business and the export sector, but there's also this issue of the sustained high currency. Housing affordability, this is really certainly wouldn't do anything for that particular issue. For that, you'd look at a capital gains tax.
Lawrence, tell me, the people coming and looking at buying houses, the younger people, the young generation, do they have that same desire to get into a home that's been for all the previous ones?
Oh, absolutely, mate. That certainly is the Kiwi dream, and it's still the case. I think at this stage, and just what Tony said, the availability of credit is a lot more available in terms of 100% financing with no deposit and that sort of thing. So people do take that option up. But if you increase the interest rates, the bank won't be able to lend them the money to buy the home. In that case, that leaves it wide open in my mind for a property investor to come along and say, first home buyer, you can't buy, I can, I've got the equity, I've got the cash flow, rent my home.
Dave Anderson, tell me something, why are people just flooding in and investing in the export sector if it is such a good investment?
Well, it isn't. And Tony just mentioned it before. Investors need stability if they're going to take a long-term investment in a capital project. They want to have surety about it, and they just can't get that in New Zealand. We're on a roller coaster ride. One minute we're down to 39 cents, the next minute for 3 or 4 years we're staying up over 70, and no doubt we're going to be back down again to 35. But I know my shareholders, they're going to sit there and say to me, forget it, Dave, you know, you've told us that we've got a stability here, and it's just not there. We're not going to put our money here.
OK, look, you know that this mortgage tax politically is probably not going to be a goer. What would you suggest?
Well, I think what a good thing would be to stop calling it a tax, because...
But it is a tax. No, call it a levy.
No. Well, you can call it a levy, but it doesn't have to be a tax. I mean, it should be seen as an opportunity to, you know, create some sort of savings for people that becomes part of a retirement policy. So if you're going to get a 2% charged on your mortgage, it sits in your name and it can be maybe fed back into the economy later on. You can't sit there, as some people have been doing today, and saying this is a bad idea and we don't want to go down there without sort of fully investigating. It's going to be bad for first homeowners. You can't be sure that it is. If it was introduced with other measures by government to encourage first homeowners, not speculators and people who want to batch and a plasma TV, then it could work. And so, you know, this is a journey we've got to go down, and we can't say at the beginning of a journey we're going to fail, because inactivity in this from an export sector just isn't going to cut the mustard.
This is where I do disagree with Dave, is it is a tax. Let's be plain and simple about that. So if it is a tax, then surely there are other means of collecting that revenue from people, and what Tony touched on was the capital gains tax, which I think would more fairly reflect what property traders and investors and the speculators who are earning an income from property, pushing the prices up, let's tax the people that are winning or benefiting from the...
Because how much of that house price movement is contributed to by speculators, Lawrence?
I think it's quite significant. I think it's more that you're finding the baby boomer generation are wanting to get into a retirement plan, and they're seeing property investment as a means of doing it. Share market is a big no.
Tony Alexander, I mean, politically this is probably not a goer, is it?
Yeah, I think that Michael Cullen, he's put it out there. It's an idea. The discussion, I think, does need to be held, because it leads into the discussion about exports, about savings, etc. But you couldn't imagine getting too many votes from, you know, the 1 million people affected directly with the mortgage rate going up.
Well, listen, do us all a favour. Do him a favour. How else can he do it? Everyone accepts there's a problem for the exporters. There's a problem with high house prices. What is the solution?
Well, if you're primarily focused on improving the conditions in the export sector, maybe you do need to have a look at a bit of a cutback in government spending, for instance. That'll take some inflationary pressure out of the economy. And the sort of measures he's talking about for his budget later this year, I mean, those things would certainly help there. In terms of directly getting the currency down, you can't do it. I mean, he's tried. He's sent people overseas to warn the investors over in Japan. The currency's going to do largely whatever it's going to do, and all you can do is hope to influence it a wee bit at the margin. I think if I was in his position, I'd be maybe just having a closer word to the Reserve Bank governor, saying, when you tighten policy, do it rapidly, do it hard. You should have had all this done back in 04-05 instead of probably raising the cash rate again come March 8.
Meanwhile, the exporters will be holding their breath?
Well, I don't know whether we can hold our breath much longer. So I think that, you know, we talked about it's a serious issue for the sector. You know, holding our breath is, you know, it's only so long you hold your breath and then you make other decisions. And people have been making decisions about their businesses in the last, and we've seen those job announcements of late.
So whatever happens, something has to happen soon.
Absolutely.
Look, guys, thank you very much. Tony Alexander and Wellington, thank you as well.